Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I've started working on my next book. I've gotten a few stories from my listeners. If you have a story, it can be your personal account of something you heard from a friend or a relative. Send it to me at strangethings@arcanasa.com. That's ARCANASA, and I'll work it into a readable format. You'll get a draft to approve or say fix something. I won't just print the thing based on my own feelings. You get to approve the final reading. We all have stories from our travels through life. Once we're no longer here, our stories will be gone as well. Nobody will ever know what happened, unless it gets written down somewhere. Here's a subject that's been kicked around for decades with no foreseeable outcome. Unknown and unexplainable lights seen either in the sky or on the ground. A 1972 astronomer, J. Allen Hynek, proposed that there are three types of close encounters that human can have with beings that we would refer to as extraterrestrial. The aim of Hynek's work was not to endorse or dismiss the possibility of life that existed beyond the knowledge of humans somewhere in our or neighboring universe. He simply wanted to find out what was going on. In order to make research a little easier to do, he came up with a system to categorize different sightings. Close encounters of the first kind, known as CE1. The witness observes a UFO nearby. There appears to be no interaction with either the witness or the environment. You simply see a UFO. Close encounters of the second type, CE2, these encounters included details of interaction between the UFO and the environment. May vary in form. It can have all kinds of things like interference with a car's ignition system or an electronic gear. Maybe your radio cuts out just before you see a UFO. Close encounters of the third kind, CE3. This category, occupants of a UFO, entities that are maybe human-like or maybe not, are seen. There's usually no direct contact or communication with the witness. However, recent years reports of incidents involving very close contact, even things like being abducted, could be considered as a CE3. There are also sightings that aren't so close up. Things like nocturnal lights, which was classified as DE1 for distant encounters. These are sightings of well-defined lights in the night sky whose appearance and or motion are not explainable in terms of conventional lights. The lights appear most often as being red, blue, orange, or white. They form the largest group of UFO reports. Strange lights seen in the sky, no matter how good the witnesses were, remained just that, lights. There wasn't much you could do then, as now. Even photographs or videos can only be gazed at with wonder. What is causing the light, and why does it do odd things? Enlarging the images only make more light. On a few occasions, objects have been found inside the light, but this is rare. The Los Angeles incident from 1943, about 2.5 months after Pearl Harbor, is a good case for this. If you blow the image up, it takes on the shape of a flying saucer. The official report tried to write this off as being, what else? A weather balloon. This must have been some newfangled bulletproof balloon, since the Army fired well over 1,400 rounds at it without causing the thing to deflate. It was visible for about an hour. That's one tough balloon. We only have the photos taken by the news people to look at and wonder what this bright light could have been. I often wonder why. Why would an advanced civilization flying over cities showing off as a bright light that anyone can see? Several physicists have said the light could be a byproduct of the craft's energy source. As any energy is being used, there is going to be changes taking place. The fuel is being transformed into energy, and maybe this is what's showing up as the light. The lights that get me are the blinking formations, like the one I saw while working out on Mines Road. I filed a MUFON report a couple of days later. March 28, 2008, Mines Road just north of Laredo, Texas. I saw 5 or 6 lights northeast of me that would blink. They would blink 3 or 4 times, and then they would stay lit. At no time did all 5 or 6 lights blink at once. Sometimes just one light would blink, and other times 2 or 3 would blink at the same time. They were moving around as well, but not in a straight line, just random movement. If they had blinked steadily, I would have thought there were planes or something, but they only blinked for a few seconds and then they would stop, staying illuminated. I tried to think what could behave like that, but I came up with nothing. As I stood there watching this aerial display, an 18-wheeler that had been driving north practically at a crawling pace because he was looking at the lights as well, stopped right next to me. The driver jumped out, still looking at the lights. He asked me what they were, to which I had no answer. The driver turned to me and said, "Don't tell anybody I saw them." Jumped back in his truck and drove away. How I was going to tell anybody he'd seen him, I had no idea what the guy's name was. I didn't even see the sign on the door of his truck. I was still staring up at the sky. Lights in the sky that blink. And that's all they were. I wasn't even considering saying anything, but after what was happening in Stevensville, I figured maybe this would add to somebody else's sighting, so I submitted a report to MUFON. The lights were high up, far away, maybe over Artesia Wells, Texas. They were way bigger and brighter than any star. They were in a circular formation. From the horizon to the lights was about 45 degrees up, northeast from where I stood. They moved from place to place in a group. always staying in a circular formation, but they never moved so far that I had to turn my head to keep an eye on them. I watched them for about a minute or two. I've thought about this sighting a lot over the years. Planes don't stay in one place for minutes at a time. Helicopters don't act like this. There were only the white lights visible. There was no green and no red. Stars don't blink, they shimmer. Satellites keep moving across the sky. If I was imagining them, that the truck driver was having the same illusions. It's one of those things that all you can do is wonder, what the heck did I see? Ishmael was doing his nightly routine, standing in his yard watching the sky with his third-generation night vision scope. Ishmael likes buying electronic gadgets. It was late summer 2011. He was just rounding out the evening, watching the stars before going to bed. Suddenly, to the north, maybe a mile away, the sky was lit up by flashes of light that were only visible through the night scope. Without the scope, the horizon was dark. The lights would blink on and off all across the sky. Running inside, he woke his wife, Gabby. She wasn't too happy about being woken up in the middle of the night. He insisted she come outside and have a look. Once outside, Gabby was impressed by what she saw. Wanting to share this encounter, Ishmael knocked on his neighbor's door. His neighbor was impressed as well, but he didn't want to go hunting for lights at midnight. Gabby suggested they try getting a bit closer, so they jumped in Ishmael's truck and they drove to the north, taking International Boulevard. They could only go so far before running out of road. Sitting at the dead end, they watched the lights. They were only a few blocks away. Ishmael and Gabby sat there passing the NVGs back and forth until an orange light came into view, a scene without the night scope. This was followed by a second, then a third. Finally, a fourth light was visible. They were bright orange and lined up across the sky. The first light blinked off, followed by the others in order of their appearance. The first light blinked back on, only now it was farther away. The second, third, and fourth lights all came on, still lined up. Now they were farther away, and they were separated by a bit more distance. Light number 1 blinked out, followed by number 2, 3, and 4. It was suddenly dark. Having seen these weird lights, Ishmael and Gabby sat there waiting to see if anything else would happen. When it was apparent the lights were gone, they drove back home. Nobody got any sleep that night, wondering what they had seen. Being the one and only paranormal investigations group in the area, the Laredo Paranormal Research Society began receiving calls from people who saw things they couldn't explain. On the east side of town, on November 30th, 2014, during a family gathering, Juan said one of his kids noticed a bright object overhead. This was in the daytime, yet it was still just a bright light. At first, everybody thought it was just a kite, but it wasn't moving with the wind. It just hung there, way too high to be any kind of a toy. Juan called some of the LPRS members and got them to look and decide what it might be. All the usual questions were asked. Was the object moving? Could you hear any sound coming from it? How high and which direction? Juan was asked to try to take a photograph. He used his cell phone, which emits an ultrasonic beam, in order to focus. As soon as the camera was pointed at the light, it blinked off. The problem encountered with sightings like this one is there's very little to be studied. You see a light that doesn't confirm to any other lights around it. You try to photograph the unknown light, or you take a video. You and perhaps others observe this light for a period of time and then it's gone. How do you go about investigating the sighting after the fact? You look at the photograph and you see an unusual light, but all you have is a picture, and there's no material to look at under a microscope. You have no sound to analyze using modern sound deciphering software. In the end, you can only say, I saw an unidentified object in the sky, and it was flying. You saw a UFO. Some lights have been seen close to the ground. The Marfa Lights are a good example, as well as the Brown Mountain Lights. Here in Laredo, we have some mystery lights as well. People have reported seeing strange lights out on a ranch where there's no reason for anything of the sort to be there. There used to be a road open to the public that is now closed due to land disputes. The light would appear and disappear at various times of the night. Using night vision cameras, thermal cameras, and digital cameras, the LPRS team set up on a hill overlooking the area where the mystery lights had been seen. The lights appeared, and they were photographed by the team members. They had an orange coloration, lined up in a row, and they would stay visible for a long time. Examining the photographs, the lights are in a straight line even though the ground underneath them dips down. There appears to be 9 lights, all at the same level. None of the lights have a heat signature or a chemical combustion trail. There was no sound coming from the area. They were not produced by oil field or other equipment that might have been used. In one photograph, there are 6 lights visible. They look to be at random in distance, one from the next, but if you measure between them, they are paired up. Each set of 2 are the same distance apart. Other times you can see as many as 9 lights. The area where the lights appear is uninhabited. There's no machinery there, no oil field equipment or ranch paraphernalia. Driving out to where the lights appear, there's nothing but brush, mesquite trees, cactus, and ratama bushes. There are rattlesnakes and rabbits and coyotes roaming the area, as well as cattle and a few mountain lions, even though the experts say that mountain lions don't live to the east side of I-35. I guess there's a sign or something on the side of the highway that say, no mountain lions allowed on this side of the highway. My wife and I have been out to the hill, and we've seen the lights as well. At that time, they were somewhat diminished, and they only showed up for about 15 minutes. Before the detention center was built out on San Ignacio Road, there had been a radar station in the same area. The dome is gone, but the base structure is still there. It has a flat upper roof, and it stands about 20 feet off the ground. It gives a great view of the surrounding area. I was trying to arrange for the site to be used as a viewing location when all the hoopla began. This combined with the structure being old and rusty with some major openings on the top floor might have discouraged the owners from allowing the public to use it, but the LPRS might have been allowed. If you're walking around up on the roof in the dark and you step off into one of these holes, well, it's 20 feet to the cement slab below. Ouch. That and the ladder leading up to the roof is pretty old and rusty, but, well, I've been up there a couple of times. The lights have now become known as the Laredo Lights. People used to come from all over Laredo and from Mexico to sit out on the hill and watch this strange phenomenon. Unfortunately, a developer bought the land where the old Webb County Detention Center used to be. The folks who originally owned the land thought this was wrong, so they closed the road leading out to the best viewing locations. I don't know if the lights are still there today. This all took place several years ago, and, well, it's hard to get back out to that hill. The Laredo Airport used to be an airbase built in 1942. Some of the wooden structures built during World War II are still there. Many of the duplexes were built after the war so that military personnel with families had some place to live. Air crews would fly out from Laredo and either make practice combat flights or work on their flight navigation skills. One air crew was flying out around Freer, 60 miles to the east, when they spotted lights up in the sky. They tried to figure out what they were seeing, but nobody came up with any kind of a solution. Once back at their base, the air crews didn't file a report, knowing that the Air Force would do to them for reporting a UFO sighting. Others had already been down that road, and word had gotten around. It wasn't called the Air Force back then. It was the Army Air Corps, but if you say Army Air Corps, people get this lost look in their eyes, and they don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, they called it the Air Force now, so. December 1942, a Royal Air Force pilot flying a Hurricane Interceptor reported witnessing two lights that shot up from the ground, coming towards his 7,000-foot cruising altitude while he was flying over France. At first, he thought this was tracer fire, but soon realized this was not the case. The mysterious lights began following him, mimicking every evasive maneuver he made. Once back at base, he filed a report and was questioned by the upper echelon. Bomber crews were concerned that these might be some German secret weapon, so they began shooting at them. 30 caliber rounds would streak out and pass right through the target. Sometimes the light would blink out, and other times it would have no effect. As more pilots and air crews began seeing these weird lights, more reports were sent to the command center. The brass had no idea what was being seen, so they did what they do anytime there's a question with no answers. They ridiculed the witnesses. It didn't take long for air crews to realize if they saw something, they'd best keep their mouths shut. If you think about this, it's kind of a lot like what's going on today when people don't want to talk about what they saw due to ridicule and doubt. Had the Germans built some new super-secret craft that showed up as a light, England would have been in a very sorry state once these craft got across the channel. As the war moved on and more bomber crews were being sent over and seeing these weird lights, they would speak about it amongst themselves, but no one ever filed an official report. The machine guns got bigger and more efficient, going from 30 to 50 caliber. Firing at these weird lights was still having no effect. Finally, somebody in the rear with the gear heard about these unknown lights, and he wanted to get to the bottom of things. Somebody in the rear finally decided maybe we should find out what these lights are instead of making fun of the people seeing them. Smokey Stover was a popular comic strip at the time. Smokey often called himself a foo fighter instead of a firefighter. The word foo also turned up on sign lists, menus, and the lips of various characters at random, but it was a frequent interval. Foo may have been inspired by the French word feu, meaning fire. Smokey's catchphrase was, "Where there's foo, there's fire." During World War II, images of Smokey Stover and his cat Spooky were painted as nose art on several American bomber aircraft. November 1944, the crew of a Bristol Beaufighter on a night mission over the Rhine saw these weird lights. The crew included radar operator Ronald Myers, an intelligence officer, and the pilot. They reported seeing about 8 to 10 orange glowing objects that moved at a fast pace and began following their aircraft. The glowing objects were described as orange and fiery red, and compared to Christmas tree decorations. The objects did not show any hostile behavior, but seemed to be under intelligent control. According to the reports, the glowing objects continued to appear for some minutes and then suddenly disappeared. The term foo was borrowed directly from Smokey Stover by the radar operator, who gave them the name Foo Fighters. The phrase was used by Allied air crews to describe the balls of light seen while on missions over the European and Pacific theaters of operation. Later, the term was used for any UFO sightings. Charles Bastien, United States Army Air Corps, also reported seeing Foo Fighters over the area of the border between the Netherlands and Belgium. He described them as looking like fog lights that were flying at a high speed and were able to make very rapid changes in direction. Foo Fighters were seen on various occasions by different people around the globe. One sighting was reported in the Indian Ocean. 2 sailors on board the SS Pulaski reported they saw strange green-colored light balls that were nearly half the size of the moon. As the Allies worked their way east into Germany, the Foo Fighters continued flying in and around bomber formations up until the fighting crossed the Rhine. When Allied forces occupied Ries and Wessel, both locations of Nazi advanced weapons research, the sightings of the lights in the night sky fell off. This led folks to believe that the Foo Fighters were Nazi aircraft, and now all they had to do was figure out what they were. After the war, as records were being gone over to see what might be learned, it turned out that the German Luftwaffe pilots saw unidentified fireballs, which they called Krautbolids or Kugelblitz. Japanese pilots and air crews also had seen these mysterious lights. It comes down to this. They weren't ours. They weren't theirs. Who does this leave? There's no idea as to how many air crews saw Foo Fighters. With the folks in charge heaping ridicule on anybody who filed a report, most sightings went unreported. Even once the high command had decided maybe they should take these sightings seriously, a lot of crews kept their mouths shut, figuring those guys in the rear might change their mind and start making fun of the reporting parties once more. All it would take is one high command officer being replaced and everything would change. In 1953, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, that's too long of a title. Now, people should understand, you don't want your name to have more than about 3 letters in it, 3 words in it, because otherwise it's just too dang much of a mouthful. The Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force decided to look and see what they could figure out about these air crews had been seeing. Looking at what few records had been generated, they came to the conclusion that Foo Fighters were not a danger to the Air Force or the public, and there were far more pressing things to look into, like the Cold War, So the subject of these mystery lights was dropped. Border Patrol agents sometimes do what's called laying in, or sitting near a landing and wait to see who or what might cross the river illegally. These lay-ins might be because of intel coming from informants, or sometimes it's just a feeling you get. The weird thing is how many times agents will get this feeling that something might happen, and it does. The agents might think a smuggler is going to cross near a particular area. The trick is to park your unit somewhere that nobody is going to see it. Then the agents have to walk, sometimes as much as a mile, to get into position. Noise and light discipline is important. You walk slowly through the brush, and you stop to scout out the area ahead of you. Once in position, one agent will watch upriver and the other watch down. No talking or messing around. You sit and you watch the river, and you hope to catch something. This could last for an entire shift, with nothing happening. Willie and his partner were working the evening shift. It was quiet, and they decided to sneak down to One River Place and watch the landings. This area has been the site of many smuggling loads, as well as a few murders. The river and the border run from north to south along this area. The two agents found a couple of spots where they could see the river in both directions, and then they got comfortable to wait and see what might happen. Willie was scanning the river to the south when he spotted a bright light in the sky. It hadn't been there a minute ago, and so he got his binoculars and tried to see if it was an airplane or some other kind of craft. As he watched, the light changed from red to blue, and then back to red. Now, this wasn't like an airplane. It wasn't blinking. Willie was a private pilot, and he knew aircraft. The light didn't blink color to color. It faded from one to the other. The lights would change from red to blue on a regular cycle of about 5 seconds. His partner was 25 yards up the river watching the other direction. One River Place has 7 landing spots used for smuggling, and they wanted to keep them all covered. Willie sat there watching this object from 10 o'clock at night until about 11. Then the object began moving, and it looked as if it were going down towards the ground. From where Willie was sitting, it appeared to have landed in Mexico across the river from El Cenizo. At the time, there were no radar balloons in the area. There were no phone numbers to call to ask the Air Force about possible aircraft near the border. There weren't any drones flying, and it wasn't anything that could be explained. The evening shift was coming to an end, and Willie and his partner needed to get back to the station. They met up near the road out and walked back to their unit. Willie debated whether to mention his sighting to his partner, and he decided probably best to keep his mouth shut. The next day, a physician's assistant, who I knew that worked at Mercy Hospital, asked if I had heard anything about a UFO that had flown over El Cenizo. He lived in El Cenizo, and the kids in his neighborhood had told him that a saucer-shaped craft with red and blue lights had landed in a field just south of town. The kids said the craft was there for a few minutes before flying away into the night. A few other Border Patrol agents working that same evening said that they had also seen red and blue lights in the sky. Nobody turned in a report since they didn't want to get a reputation for seeing things, even if these things were real. A schoolteacher told me that she was on her way to work early one morning. As she drove north on Bartlett, she saw what looked like an airplane coming in for a landing. She was just north of the airport and right next to the runway. The lights hung there in the sky as she drove along, soon wondering why they weren't moving. The lights stayed motionless, hanging over the north side of town. Then, from one moment to the next, the lights vanished. The teacher wondered what she had seen and whether these lights would come back on, or maybe be seen again the next day. She kept looking for the lights for the rest of the week, but never saw them again. Most police officers who have encounters with the unknown will tell me not to use their name for any reason. I can understand this. They don't want to be known for seeing things, since this can be a career ender. One police officer did ask me to use his name. I'll just call him Rolando for this show. He told me the following account, and here is what he said in his own words. Back in 1994, 1 year into my career in the Laredo PD, I was freshly off the FTO program. It was in November. I was working the graveyard shift. I was patrolling South Laredo. I went by the rest area, which is on the outskirts on 83 South, and it sits on a hill. It is still there today, but it's in really bad shape. I checked the area out, and then I proceeded to exit the rest area and back on to 83 South, now driving north. I noticed a white light in the sky in the distance, right on the center of 83 South. I saw it, but I thought it was a helicopter since I could only see what appeared to be the front spotlight, which I thought was the front light of the helicopter. I kept staring at it periodically since I was driving. All of a sudden, the light made a 90-degree right turn at a fast rate of speed heading towards the riverbank, which was to the west. That caught my attention since it was not a turn typical to a helicopter. It then came back fast at a speed that is also not typical to a helicopter. I pulled onto the shoulder of 83 South and stopped. I still had visual on the globe of white light. As I exited the police unit, I lost sight of it for about a second, and as I stood up by the driver's side door, the light was gone. It was a clear night, no clouds at all, and there were only a limited number of stars that were visible. It could not have lost it. I figure it had passed me, so I looked back towards the south area of the sky, and there's nothing there. I looked to the east and the west, still nothing. It was just gone. If it had been a helicopter, it would have seen it as I stood outside the police unit. To this date, I still try to give it a reasonable explanation, but I can't come up with one. My second sighting was made a few months after my first one. I was just off the edge of Mines Road on a ranch, sitting in my unit waiting for either something to happen or the end of the shift to arrive. I was listening to Clyde Lewis on my XM radio. It had been quiet all night, and I was feeling the strain of staying awake, so I got out of my unit to stretch and move around a bit. I glanced up in the air to my north, and I saw a very bright light. It was about the size of a dime, held out at full arm's length. The light was moving very fast from east to west. It would have been my right to my left. It changed directions without slowing down. One moment it was going to the left, and the next it was going back the way it had come. There isn't an airplane on Earth that could have done what I had just seen. In my books, I try to write about sightings not covered in other books or on TV and radio. I've had folks comment on how these stories are all unique. It's my way of doing things. I carry my business cards around everywhere I go. I will ask folks if they've ever seen a ghost or a UFO, depending on when and where I am. As soon as they give me that look, and they have that look on their face that says, "What did this guy just say?" I'll hand over one of my cards and I'll tell them that I'm a writer, and then I'll ask them if they've ever had a sighting or an encounter. Most will say they've never seen anything. It's the 10th or the 20th person who will proceed to tell me about something bizarre either they saw or a friend or a family member said they'd seen. I always try to take notes as soon as the story comes out. This can be difficult when in a store, since the person I'm talking to might have a boss who doesn't want them talking to customers for 10 or 20 minutes. On occasion, I've had the manager come over and tell me their story. I get a lot of weird looks from people, but I get a lot of good stories as well. Oh, somebody just knocked something off a shelf somewhere. Cats. February 2016. Alonzo was delivering a load of salt water to a disposal site off of Highway 44 when he saw some lights. He said, "I was coming from an oil field tank farm. I turned off Highway 35 and I drove west on 44 for about 2 miles. It was about 5 in the morning and kind of cold for a February. I pulled into the dump site and pulled over to where I could offload my truck. To the north, I saw a very bright light. It was too big to be a star, but it wasn't moving like a plane. It just hung there. As I watched it, trying to figure out what it was, a second light appeared to its right. Then a third, and a fourth light showed. There were 6 drivers there, and one of the guys had brought his wife, so there were 7 of us. We all stood there watching the lights, wondering what they were. The lights were blinking on and off. Then they all reappeared just to the east. They looked as if they had moved closer to us as well. After watching them, they blinked out and then didn't come back on. We all tried to think of what the lights might have been, but nobody could come up with anything to explain what we had just seen. Years ago, a UFO was spotted in the air north of San Ignacio, south of Laredo. The unknown craft was first seen as a set of lights that changed from one color to another. Sound familiar? It hung in the sky for several hours. People who saw these weird lights ran into their homes to wake relatives so they could come out and see this spectacle as well. About 3 days after the sightings, a man's body was found on a ranch, approximately below where the lights had been seen. The man had been a worker on one of the ranches. He was found laying on the ground with a rifle beside him. The rifle had been fired several times, and spent shell cases were laying on the ground around him. The autopsy determined that the man had died from fright. What did this unfortunate man see? It is believed that he saw the lights overhead and began shooting at them. Something happened immediately after, causing him to die. Something so terrifying his heart stopped beating. Carlos and his friend were driving along Mines Road, also known as FM 1472. They were past what is known as the end of the pavement. Mines Road runs all the way out to Eagle Pass, but FM 1472 becomes FM 1021. They were heading to Laredo, and they were coming up on a curve. There was a white cross on the left side denoting where somebody had died in a vehicle accident. Carlos looked at the cross and he said, "What if someone pops out of the bushes?" He was referring to a ghost of whoever had died there. They both looked at the cross as they went by. Their attention was drawn upwards to the sky. There were about 20 lights, about the height of 2 electric poles, forming a circle. The lights were too bright and too big to be stars. As they watched these lights, they began to blink off and on, one at a time, moving along in the circle in a clockwise rotation. This aerial light display went on for a few minutes, and then the lights all blinked off. All they could say was this was a weird-looking thing to see. 2014. Gilbert was driving his Dodge Magnum on Christmas night at about 9:30 p.m. He was just out for a drive, enjoying the quiet of the mostly deserted roads. The sky was slightly overcast, but visibility was good. As he was heading east on Business 83, he noticed a bright light in the sky. It looked like a street light, only it was much bigger and brighter than any of the lights along the highway. The light looked as if it were hovering over a lumber yard. Wondering what he was looking at, Gilbert took a left and began trying to get a better view. As he was getting close enough to see what this light might be, he got his cell phone ready to take a picture. As the details were coming into focus, the light suddenly shot straight up into the clouds overhead, fading from view. He was left wondering what had just vanished into the night. In 2017, Gilbert was northbound on US 84, about 20 miles outside of Schneider, Texas. It was early January or February. Gilbert was in the passenger seat of his coworker's pickup truck heading to a job site. There were just the two of them in the first pickup, being followed by a second pickup with 5 others. The 2 vehicles were en route to Amarillo. The sky was slightly overcast. At around 7:15, Gilbert spotted a light over the road. It looked to be about 10 miles ahead of them. At first, he thought it was a helicopter or maybe some other aircraft looking for something along the side of the road. Maybe the sheriff's department or the DPS out looking for speeders. Gilbert asked the driver if he could see the light. The driver said yes, he'd been keeping an eye on it for the last few minutes. They continued north, getting closer to the light. As their truck was passing right under it, Gilbert leaned forward up against the windshield, trying to get a better look. The light shot straight up into the clouds. Gilbert couldn't help but think this was exactly like the last time. The driver asked what had happened to the light, and Gilbert filled him in on how the light had vanished. Next, he called the other pickup and asked if they had seen the light. The driver of the other truck said he hadn't seen anything and everybody else in the truck was asleep. The mystery light had been in view for at least 15 to 20 minutes. When Lisa was 15, she lived on a ranch outside of Laredo. It was one of those places where they had to walk a long dirt road out to the bus stop to get to school. Her and her friend Melina were walking to the stop early one morning. As they got close to the gate, they spotted 3 or 4 bright lights up in the sky. At first, the 2 girls thought they were just looking at some stars, but these were moving. They watched as the stars danced around overhead, suddenly moving together, forming one big bright star-like light. The light took off, flying away far faster than any airplane could have moved. They gave each other a look and asked if the other had seen the same thing. This was not the kind of thing they wanted to discuss with others, so they kept this sighting to themselves. Years later, when Lisa was 16 or 18 years old, she realized there was a period of time missing from her memory. As she had come to find she was someplace with no idea where she was or how she got there. It became obvious when she was attending a party. Several of the kids attending came over and began talking to her as if they were longtime friends. She racked her brain trying to put names to these people, but still felt as if they were strangers. These kids all called her by name, and they continued as if she should know them. As the one-sided conversation went on, they said that Lisa had lived with them for a few weeks. She began to suspect that these kids were playing some kind of an elaborate joke at her expense. The mother and grandmother of the kids walked over and each hugged Lisa, saying they had missed her and were glad to see her again, hoping all was well. These statements made Lisa remember the time she had felt as if she were lost somewhere and now couldn't remember the family around her. She told them she didn't remember them at all. This only led to more confusion as the family talked about how nice it had been to have Lisa as a house guest. They told her she had been very nice and they enjoyed their time together. They told her it was most definitely her because she had a very distinguishable birthmark under her chin and they had noticed it. Lisa listened to them, growing more concerned about her missing time. Even with the story about her visit, Lisa never found the memories hidden away inside her brain. The entire family wished her all the best as they parted ways for what must be the second time. From that time on, Lisa has found several times in her memory where hours or days are missing. Times she can't remember how she wound up in a place or what had transpired during her trip to get there. She believes the last period of missing time is from 2019. Today, Lisa will get a feeling she needs to step outside. Once there, she scans the sky and sure enough, she'll spot a UFO. She feels as if it's calling her to come out and communicate with the occupants of these unknown craft. This happens both night and day. The last week of January 2018, Gabe was driving on Loop 20 near Maria Luisa Drive. His 10-year-old son was in the passenger seat. It was about 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the evening. The sun was on the horizon and the sky was turning bright colors as it disappeared from sight. To the north-northwest, 3 bright orange lights appeared. Gabe watched these lights as he continued driving north, coming up on Bencha Drive. The lights made a sudden move all at once, going back and forth in the sky before speeding away to the north. He said it looked as if they were moving at light speed, vanishing from sight. Gabe looked at his son to see if he had been watching these lights. His son was looking back with unasked questions. What were those lights? Gabe asked his son to describe what he had seen, and his son told him the exact same thing that he had seen. Days later, Gabe looked for videos on the internet to see if anyone had reported the occurrence. It turned out there were the same 3 lights had been seen by oilfield workers near Catarina, Texas. Gabe said that's the most vivid experience he's ever had seeing anything like that. Servando runs a tire recycling operation just off of Mines Road. On many nights right after sundown, he as well as his workers have seen some weird lights in the sky. It always begins with one bright light stationary in the sky to the northwest. A second light appears in the sky just a little ways from the first light. The first light slowly fades from sight. This is followed by a third light as the second light fades. This may happen several times from the lights before the lights are all out. People driving on Mines Road have seen odd lights in the sky on many occasions. This can't be an airplane because the lights aren't moving or blinking. It's just hanging there in the night sky, then slowly fading away. The lights are almost always following the same light, but once in a while, a light will appear below or above the line. Someone was able to catch these lights in a video and they put it on the internet. On occasion, there will be like maybe 5 lights together in a row. The light on the very end will fade from view, and then a new light will appear at the opposite end of the line. And then, back to the beginning of the line, a light will fade from view, and then another light will appear at the far end. It's almost as if the lights are moving across the sky, but they're not moving. They're just changing positions. While driving along 255 en route to San Antonio, a Servando spotted some more odd lights. He was with his wife, and they both looked at the lights blinking on and off as if some kind of a pattern. They turned on to I-35, and they could still see the lights to their left. As they were drawing near the Border Patrol checkpoint, the lights vanished from sight. On the return trip back to Laredo, once more the lights were there, somewhere over Webb County or possibly in Mexico. I've seen the videos made on Mines Road. It matches other videos taken all over the place. Strange lights doing strange things. If you listened to last week, you heard about how sometimes aliens from outer space, Greys, or any of the other many beings coming here to do whatever aliens do, these things will sometimes act or convince people seeing them that they're ghosts or spirits instead of space creatures. The big question is, what are these lights people are seeing all over the place? Seeing a light in the sky that you absolutely know is not a star, airplane, or weather balloon, you have to wonder, what are you looking at? The naysayers will try to convince us there are just normal things being mistaken or for otherworldly items. Why do aliens place their ships in circles and blink their lights on and off? Some kind of atmospheric discotheque? Maybe it's a Pink Floyd concert. Maybe what people are seeing has nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with spirits. Those blinking lights could be atmospheric ghosts. To tell the truth, I don't really want to know. I thought I unplugged that thing. Almost done with the show before they called. Maybe what people are seeing has nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with spirits. Those blinking lights are atmospheric ghosts. To tell the truth, I don't really want to know. It's kind of like the treasure at the bottom of the money pit. Whatever it may be, when Rick and Marty find it, the world will be less mysterious. Seeing a light in the sky, really all you can do is look at it and maybe photograph it, and that's about it. The naysayers are going to continue to say it's just a weather balloon. Who knows what it might be? Send me those stories and I'll put you in my next book, Strange Things at Arcanasa.com. That's ARCANASA.com. If you enjoyed the show, let your neighbors know that they should enjoy it as well. And if you have a story or something you'd like me to talk about on the show, it's the same address, Strange Things at Arcanasa. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.